President Trump has aspirations for closing the U.S. Department of Education. His Secretary of Education recently confirmed wants to shut down this department and wants to push all the money onto the states. Let's take a moment to talk about what the Federal Department of Education does. It's important to recognize that most education policy is really done on a state and local level. And the reason why is that historically we want the decisions about education on the most local level. It's why all schools are run by school boards governed by towns, and different school boards in different communities have different makeups and different political ways of organizing, but almost all education is done on the state and local level. So what's the reason for the U.S. Department of Education? Really, it's in providing funding and broad direction for particular areas like civil rights, special ed, and financial aid for higher education. The DOE provides funding, especially when it comes to low-income students, called Title I funding. The U.S. DOE also provides funding for special education and financial aid for college, so like Pell Grants and student loan support. In terms of civil rights, the Federal Department of Education ensures that schools comply with federal laws related to anti-discrimination laws. The U.S. Department of Education also does a lot of data collection and research and funding on behalf of school districts that can't do it for themselves. So like student performance and graduation rates and other educational trends that are important for local school districts to know, the U.S. Federal Department of Education does a lot of that research. In the last 30 years, the U.S. Department of Education has started doing educational standards and accountability metrics on the federal level for the states. And so the most pressing one is Common Core and the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, under the Obama administration. Before that, under the Bush administration, it was the No Child Left Behind program. Both of these were federal plans and programs for educational standards, tying funding to performance and compliance with these federal standards. Most school districts create their own standards, but the U.S. federal government said under the Bush and Obama administrations that every student should have basic standards when it comes to, for example, what a fourth grader should know about fractions, or what a sixth grader should know about U.S. history. Now, it's important to note that most of it's still done on the local level. So like a Texas teenager should learn Texas state history, while a New York teenager learns New York state history. The federal government has allowed, obviously, that flexibility because different kids from different parts of the country are expected to know different things. For example, obviously, like on an extreme stereotypical way, a student from a rural community might have a curriculum that has an agricultural focus, while perhaps someone from an inner city wouldn't. Obviously, these are like elective-based curriculum changes, but the U.S. government has said all fourth graders should know how to add fractions, for example, and those are the educational standards. The Department of Education is also, Federal Department of Education is also provides higher education oversight, so making sure that like there's no fraud and abuse when it comes to colleges and universities, especially for-profit universities, taking advantage of students. And then the last big thing the DOE does is early childhood and special programs, most popularly the Head Start program. In fiscal year 2025, the U.S. Department of Education has a budget of approximately $79 billion. So where's that money going? Well, the largest line item is to Title I grants. So most of the money is being pushed from the federal government into the states and into local communities. So it's not like when Republicans mostly, and the Trump administration says they want to close down the U.S. Department of Education because they think that bureaucrats in D.C. are spending all this money. It's really that they're earmarking money and then giving it to the states and local communities. So the number one line item is Title I grants that are going, that's about $16.5 billion. That's high poverty areas getting additional funding from the federal government, given that in most states, certainly in New York, tax revenue is tied to either the municipality, education funding is tied to the municipality, or it's tied to housing taxes on housing. Low-income communities don't get their a fair amount of funding, and that's why the U.S. federal government has stepped in and given this Title I grant to poor communities, $16.5 billion. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act for students with disabilities, that's $14.1 billion in this coming fiscal year. Pell Grants for low-income undergraduate students get a large sum of money. There's all sorts of programs about technical school. About $1.3 billion is for technical school education, earmarked for that. Head Start gets $10.7 billion dedicated to early childhood education. There's all sorts of other, obviously, like the accountability and the data collection and the research. All of that requires funding. That stuff is mostly done on the federal level in D.C., but most of the money that the U.S. Federal Department of Education collects and spends are really expenditures that are given to the states.